Happy Wednesday, friends and faithful listeners. We are in 2 Kings 10 today, and we're going to finish up this chapter talking about Jehu completely destroying Baal worship. And even though it's kind of grotesque, there is a funny aspect to this, so we're going to talk about that today as well. All right, faithful listeners, let's go ahead and jump right in to 2 Kings 10, 18 through 36. Make sure to grab your favorite cup of coffee this morning or your favorite cup of tea. And I should tell you that I got my crazy t-shirts in, and those will be up on my website very, very quickly because I needed something for you crazy tea drinkers because, you know, the coffee drinkers, they have something. They have sanity. And they also have the 7 Weeks coffee, which I offer, which is a really great coffee company. You should check it out. But I don't have anything for you crazy tea drinkers. I looked into some tea companies and couldn't find anything. So I decided, you know what, I'll just make a t-shirt for you guys, a tea shirt, which I found quite punny and enjoyable. And I hope you guys do as well. So I'll let you know when that new t-shirt is up on the website. But in the meantime, check out the Lion of Judah tea because it's updated. It looks great. And spring is here. You're going to need a nice, comfortable t-shirt for spring and summer months. All right, let's go ahead and read 2 Kings 10, 18 through 36. I'll be reading this as I usually do from the WEB. Jehu gathered all the people together and said to them, Ahab served Baal a little, but Jehu will serve him much. Now therefore call to me all the prophets of Baal, all his worshippers, and all of his priests. Let no one be absent, for I have a great sacrifice to Baal. Whoever is absent, he shall not live. But Jehu did deceptively, intending to destroy the worshippers of Baal. Jehu said, Sanctify a solemn assembly for Baal. So they proclaimed it. Jehu sent throughout all of Israel, and all the worshippers of Baal came, so that there was not a man left that didn't come. They came into the house of Baal, and the house of Baal was filled from one end to another. He said to him who kept the wardrobe, Bring out the robes for all the worshippers of Baal. So he brought robes out to them. Jehu went with Jehonadab, the son of Rechab, into the house of Baal. Then he said to the worshippers of Baal, Search and see that none of the servants of Yahweh are here with you, but only the worshippers of Baal. So they went in to offer sacrifice and burnt offerings. Now Jehu had appointed for himself 80 men outside, and said, If any of the men whom I bring into your hands escapes, he who lets him go, his life shall be for the life of him. As soon as he had finished offering the burnt offering, Jehu said to the guard and to the captains, Go in and kill them, let no one escape. So they struck them with the edge of the sword. The guard and the captains threw the bodies out, and went to the inner shrine of the house of Baal. They brought out the pillars that were in the house of Baal and burned them. They broke down the pillar of Baal, and broke down the house of Baal, and made it a latrine to this day. Thus Jehu destroyed Baal out of Israel. However, Jehu didn't depart from the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, with which he made Israel to sin, the golden calves that were in Bethel and that were in Dan. Yahweh said to Jehu, Because you have done well in executing that which is right in my eyes, and have done to Ahab's house according to all that was in my heart, your descendants shall sit on the throne of Israel to the 4th generation. But Jehu took no heed to walk in the law of Yahweh, the God of Israel, with all his heart. He didn't depart from the sins of Jeroboam, with which he made Israel to sin. In those days, Yahweh began to cut away parts of Israel, and Hazael struck them in all the borders of Israel, from the Jordan eastward, all the land of Gilead, the Gadites, the Reubenites, the Manassites, from Aror, which is by the valley of Arnon, even Gilead and Bashan. Now the rest of the acts of Jehu, and all that he did, and all his might, aren't they written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? Jehu slept with his fathers, and they buried him in Samaria. Jehoahaz his son reigned in his place. The time that Jehu reigned over Israel in Samaria was 28 years. So if you haven't listened to the previous 2 episodes that I did in the book of 2 Kings, you might want to do that in order to understand who Jehu is and like what's going on here. But I'll tell you anyway, as I always do. Basically, Jehu was the guy who God appointed as the next king of Israel. And with that responsibility of being king, Jehu was supposed to dole out God's punishment on Ahab's family because Ahab was a nasty king. Jezebel was a nasty queen. We've gone through all that several times, so I'm not going to get back into that. But one of the things that I mentioned on Monday was that Jehu went too far with his killing of people associated with Ahab, because that's actually mentioned in Hosea chapter 1, verses 2 through 5, I believe. And I forgot to look this up, so give me 1 second while I go over there to Hosea. Yeah, here's what it says, and this is out of the AMP version, starting in verse 3, actually, of Hosea 1. So Hosea went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. And the Lord said to him, name him Jezreel, for yet in a little while I will avenge the blood that was shed in the valley of Jezreel, and inflict the punishment for it on the house of Jehu, and will put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. On that day I will break the bow of the military power of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. So as you can see there in Hosea chapter 1, Jehu went too far with doling out God's judgment in Jezreel with the people who were associated with Ahab. And that's usually the opposite of what kings do when they are given a command by God. Usually the kings will disobey God's command by just not doing it or not doing it fully. But Jehu was the opposite in that he fully obeyed God's command, but went too far with it into complete lack of grace and mercy for anybody associated with Ahab's family or Ahab's household. But this is important because it shows us a little bit about Jehu's character. He was a warmonger through and through. Like, it kind of seems that that is something he really appreciates. And it, to me, seems like he takes every opportunity he can to battle somebody. Almost like he gets a thrill out of it. Which makes a lot of sense because he was a military guy before he became the anointed king. He was a captain of many people, and he served under King Ahab. And so the military life was something that he was immersed in completely and just really appreciated, but he took it too far. And he kind of reminds me of one other biblical character that we've talked about before, and that being Joab. You guys remember how Joab was. He was kind of an anomaly himself and sort of a bizarre guy like Jehu was. Joab loved the battlefield. His one goal in life was to just be the general of David's army. That's really all he ever wanted. It doesn't seem like Joab ever wanted to take the place of King David or be the king, but he wanted to lead that army. That was his goal in life. And so Joab, he would worship God and follow God when it came to the battlefield, when it came to war, when it came to things he appreciated. But he wouldn't follow God for other things. And it kind of seems like that's how Jehu is as well. Jehu has that military mindset, really appreciates the battlefield, maybe gets a thrill from it, and follows God when it comes to battle and things like that, but even takes it too far where he starts passing over into sin and causing too much destruction and using Yahweh's name to do it. So in the story we read today, it says, Jehu gathered all the people together and said to them, Ahab served Baal a little, but Jehu will serve him much. So Jehu sends this letter out to all of Israel now that Jehu is basically the established king. He sends this letter out and he tells all Baal followers, come to the temple of Baal because, you think Ahab served Baal? I'm going to serve Baal that much harder. I'm going to be the best Baal worshiper in the entire world. And in this letter, he calls all the prophets of Baal, all of Baal's worshipers, and all of the priests. And he tells them, let no one be absent, for I have a great sacrifice to Baal in mind. Whoever is absent shall not live. But then it says here, Jehu did deceptively, intending to destroy the worshipers of Baal. And here's what's interesting. Baal worship was wrong. It should never have been in Israel to begin with. Jehu was absolutely right in wanting to destroy Baal worship out of Israel because Baal worship was disgusting and egregious, and the way Baal was worshipped, I've talked about that 100 times already on the podcast, but it was disgusting. what people would do in order to worship Baal. And it was humiliating for God's people to behave in that way. Not to mention, that meant that the people of Israel, if they're worshiping Baal, wouldn't be worshiping Yahweh, which means that Israel would be in spiritual darkness. And the things that matter most in our lives is obviously the state of our spiritual health. So Jehu was right in the fact that he wanted to destroy Baal worship out of Israel, because it should have been destroyed. But this also shows that King, what's his name? It already left my brain. What was the king before this? King Jehoram. It mentioned when King Jehoram, the guy before Jehu, first became king, he took away the Baal altars. But he clearly did not destroy Baal worship out of Israel at all, because the Baal temple was still there, and they still had all the priests and the prophets of Baal as well. So Baal worship was not gone out of Israel, even though King Jehoram apparently got rid of some of the Baal altars to Baal. But unfortunately, Baal worship is still alive and well. And so Jehu was absolutely right in wanting to get rid of Baal worship. But I don't know if he went about it the right way, because there was some deception that Jehu used in order to bring all of these Baal prophets and priests and worshipers together. It actually says in the AMP in verse 19, Jehu did it with trickery in order to destroy the worshipers of Baal. But let's continue on with what Jehu did. So he brings together all of these prophets of Baal and all of these priests. And it also says the worshipers as well. But from my understanding, it seems to me that Jehu was mostly targeting the prophets of Baal, the leaders of Baal, and the priests of Baal. So all of the people who had a hand in like leading others into worship is kind of what it sounds like to me. Now, I could be wrong. There could be some like ordinary Baal worshipers that showed up for this big event that Jehu was supposedly putting on. But just based upon what scripture says, it does seem to me that he targeted mostly the prophets and the priests of Baal, because all of these people show up to the temple of Baal. And it says that the house of Baal was filled from one end to the other. And this wouldn't have been a small building, obviously. It was a big building, but it was jam-packed with all of these Baal priests and Baal worshipers and Baal prophets. So he says to the Baal wardrobe keeper, he says, bring out robes for all the worshipers of Baal. And then it says in verse 22 that he brought the robes out to them. And so Jehu went in with Jehonadab, the son of Rechab, into the house of Baal. You guys remember Jehonadab? I mentioned him on Monday. He was the head of the Rechabites, which was like a really conservative sect of Israelites that were super against Baal worship, super against drinking, and lived off of the wilderness land, believing that God would sustain every need that they had. They were a really niche group of Israelites, but God actually commended the Rechabites in Jeremiah chapter 35 because the Rechabites were so obedient. So Jehu went in with Jehonadab, the son of Rechab, into the house of Baal. Then he said to the worshipers of Baal, search and see that none of the servants of Yahweh are here with you, but only the worshipers of Baal. Now, when I read the Antiquities of the Jews by Josephus, Josephus also mentioned that, and I don't know if this is true or not because it's not specifically stated in scripture, but Josephus mentioned that Jehu and Jehonadab also made sure that there were no foreigners because Jehu was only specifically targeting Baal worship, not any other religion. But I don't know if that's true. Just something interesting that Josephus mentioned in his book. But they searched the room to make sure that there are no Yahweh worshipers at all in this building. So then Jehu, it says, goes in to offer sacrifices and burnt offerings. And even though he's doing this all in this grand deception to fool these Baal worshipers, it's kind of bizarre to me that he is sacrificing to Baal and presenting offerings to Baal, because I don't know if a Yahweh follower could do something like that. And we do find out in this portion that Jehu doesn't really have a heart for Yahweh, unfortunately. He still allows other forms of idol worship in Israel, even though he for some reason targeted Baal worship like fully and completely, just let other forms of idolatry totally, go. He didn't care about those other forms of idolatry. So his heart wasn't fully with Yahweh. And that kind of shows right here that even though, yes, he's doing this grand deception, he still is offering a sacrifice to Baal. So it says in verse 24, they went in to offer sacrifices and burnt offerings. Now Jehu had appointed for himself 80 men outside and said, if any of the men whom I bring into your hands escape, he who lets him go, his life shall be for the life of him. In other words, he tells the 80 men who are standing outside, he says, if any person out of here tries to escape and you let them go, you're going to die. So it says, as soon as he finished offering the burnt offering, Jehu said to the guard and the captains, go in and kill them. Let no one escape. So they struck them with the edge of the sword, and the guard and the captains threw the bodies out and went into the inner shrine of the house of Baal. So every single person, all of these priests, prophets, and other leaders of Baal worship all died within that hour. Every single person. So it says that Jehu and his team brought out the pillars that were in the house of Baal and burned them. Then they broke down the pillar of Baal and broke down the house of Baal and made it a latrine to this day. Which that is hilarious, quite honestly, because as you guys know, when I talked about what Baal worship is, Baal worship included excrement worship, human feces worship. And the altar of Baal looked like a toilet, where people would come and they would pull up their skirts in front of everybody. They would defecate in front of everybody and then offer that defecation as an offering to Baal and then worship it. And then that excrement was used on the crops to fertilize them, which, wow, I'm just realizing something now, guys. Remember how we talked about how Jehu killed Jezebel? Her body became fertilizer for Naboth's plot. Oh, wow. God really does have a sense of humor, quite honestly. But another thing quite funny is that the house of Baal became a public restroom. And it says it remains to this day. So that is what Jehu did. He totally destroyed Baal worship out of Israel entirely. And Jehu did this by getting rid of all of the leaders of Baal worship. Because now that the priests and the prophets and the leaders of Baal worship are gone, naturally, Baal worship is going to fizzle out among the people because there's no place for these people to go to worship Baal. There's nobody to present their sacrifices and their offerings to Baal. It's now a dead religion and also a public restroom as well. And that was a way for Jehu to completely humiliate any Baal worshiper left in Israel. Thus, Jehu destroyed Baal out of Israel. However, Jehu didn't depart from the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, with which he made Israel to sin, the golden calves that were in Bethel and that were in Dan. And you guys remember those things. The golden calves were Jeroboam's invention. Jeroboam was the first king of Israel, and because he was power hungry, he didn't want the Israelites to travel down to Jerusalem to go to Yahweh's temple. And so he said, hey, look, there's some golden calves right here that you can just worship right in Israel. And, these are Yahweh. These golden calves are Yahweh. You can just worship Yahweh right here. And that obviously made God very angry because he told the Israelites, you need to go to a specific location that I choose. And that location happened to be in Jerusalem at Yahweh's temple. So Jeroboam sinned by causing Israel to sin with these golden calves because it was just idol worship. And it says that Jehu didn't depart from the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, with which he made Israel to sin, the golden calves that were in Bethel and that were in Dan. But then in verse 30, and this is what makes a lot of people think that Jehu was a really good king, was because God did bless him. In verse 30, Yahweh said to Jehu, because you have done well in executing that which is right in my eyes, and have done to Ahab's house according to all that was in my heart, your descendants shall sit on the throne of Israel to the 4th generation. But like I said on Monday, God is sometimes silent about things, and his silence is not necessarily approval. God rewarded Jehu because Jehu obeyed God. But God didn't reward Jehu for all of the other things that Jehu did. In fact, Jehu's reward actually isn't really that good. I mean, look at what God does here. Because you have done well in executing that which is right in my eyes, and have done to Ahab's house according to all that was in my heart, your descendants shall sit on the throne of Israel to the 4th generation. Meaning that Jehu's dynasty would last for 4 generations. And that was the only reward Jehu got, was that I think his great-grandchild would sit on the throne, but then that would be the end of Jehu's reign. And yes, that is a blessing from God, to have any descendants of yours become kings, but this is not like the other blessings God gave the other kings. For example, God actually told Jeroboam, the first king of Israel, he told him, if you do what is right in my sight, your descendants will always sit on the throne of Israel. But this is definitely not the same blessing that God gave to Jeroboam as God gives to Jehu right now, meaning that Jehu was not perfectly walking in God's ways. And then it says that right after. It says, but Jehu took no heed to walk in the law of Yahweh, the God of Israel, with all his heart. He didn't depart from the sins of Jeroboam, with which he made Israel to sin. In those days, Yahweh began to cut away parts of Israel, and Hazael struck them in all the borders of Israel. From the Jordan eastward, all the land of Gilead, the Gadites, the Reubenites, and the Manassites, from Aror, which is by the valley of Arnon, even Gilead and Bashan. We know that when God is pleased with a king, usually they have military success. And Hazael was causing a ton of trouble for Israel, so that shows that God was not pleased with how Jehu was ruling and some of the things that Jehu was doing. Then it says, now the rest of the acts of Jehu and all that he did and all his might, aren't they written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel? Jehu slept with his fathers, and they buried him in Samaria. Jehoahaz his son reigned in his place. And the time that Jehu reigned over Israel in Samaria was 28 years. So Jehu had a relatively long reign, and his son did take the throne as God promised. But as we can see, Jehu was not a very good king, because God started taking land away from Jehu and from Israel, and not to mention what it says in Hosea chapter 1, where God was finally going to pay Jehu for the bloodshed he caused in Jezreel. So that's it, faithful listeners. Another bad king of Israel is in the books. And Jehu, not the best, but also he was not the worst king of Israel. I'd actually say that for all of his faults, he was probably one of the best kings of Israel, if not the best, because at least he did obey in some capacities, and at least he got rid of Baal worship out of Israel, but he certainly was not a good king and caused a lot of problems as well. But faithful listeners, I am definitely really excited to talk about the next chapter, because it's going to be discussing a queen, and this queen is like the worst person on the planet, possibly worse than Jezebel. So we're going to talk about her, and I'm definitely excited to get into that portion of scripture. So you're going to want to tune in on Monday. So I hope to see you then, faithful listeners, 6 a.m. or whenever you choose to wake up and listen. Until then, happy listening, and God bless.